This interruption is brought to you by Bevnay. Bevnay, let's get to your question. Because who wants to wait for the fucking intro? My dude, just started up natural desiccated thyroid inspired by you. Feel like my body is running much warmer now. How do you spread out your 3 capsules a day, or do you take them all at once? Good morning, everybody. I take them all at once in the morning. I found that for a while I was taking, I think first initially when I was taking this bovine desiccated thyroid stuff from New Zealand, which is actually really powerful. I don't think that it's quite comparable to like a compounded pharmaceutical grade desiccated thyroid. I would say it's comparable, but it's not as strong as that stuff, but it is very noticeable. That I started with one. It made a significant difference in how my energy was throughout the day, this desiccated thyroid stuff. At that point, I believe I tried to dose another one shortly after that. Like the next day, I tried to dose 2, and I felt a little anxious. So it was like ramping up thyroid hormones, and my body wasn't used to it. So the shit is actually powerful and does work. And then I got used to 2, and I took 2 desiccated thyroid supplements for a very, very long time. And that was pretty good for energy. But in the last, I want to say 2 months or so, I decided to try to tolerate 3. And look, every time that you try to titrate up on a dose of something like a hormone specifically, there is a little adjustment period where maybe it feels overstimulating or something. And so it definitely felt that way, you know, moving from 1 to 2, but moving from 2 to 3, I think the first morning I felt a little anxious, like getting coffee and hanging out on my phone outside of the store, waiting for the store to open or whatever, going in and getting shit. And then that passed within a half an hour. And then the next day when I took 3, I felt fine. So it's basically a matter of just titrating up your dose on this stuff specifically, the New Zealand bovine desiccated thyroid stuff, and getting to the point where your body does what it needs, or you're getting the adequate thyroid hormones that you need, because this stuff actually does contain T3, and where you ultimately end up just tolerating it fine. Yeah, you know. So if I were you, I would try to do it that way. Titrate up it, you know. I'm glad you're having a good response from this thyroid stuff, because it is fucking powerful. You know, I've been taking it now for years. My girlfriend takes it or just started taking it a couple months ago, and she seems to notice the difference. And it is one of those supplements that actually does work. I don't want to say few supplements work, but it's one of those supplements that you can be sure it's going to create an effect. So, I don't spread the capsules out. I think it's beneficial to take them all at once up until tolerability. If you feel a little overstimulated, keep the dose that makes you overstimulated. If after 3 or 4 days that still makes you feel like it's too much, that it is too much, and then you probably need to, dial back on it. Otherwise, you're probably just going to get used to it. All right. I just wanted to kind of, interrupt the intro with that because it would have went on for another 2 minutes, by the way. Hope you guys are great. Happy Saturday. A couple things to discuss. Number one, I think the primary thing that I want to discuss is the use of a non-aromatizable androgen with TRT. I'm not endorsing the use of that. I'm not suggesting people do that. I'm not saying you should go and do that. You should talk to a medical professional about every decision that you make regarding changes in your protocol or whatever. This channel is strictly for giving advice and also giving, kind of an educational perspective based on what I've seen. That said, one of the things that I've seen is that there are people for whom estradiol specifically, they're extremely sensitive to, likely at the male organ tissue level, and also at the dopamine inhibition level, meaning estrogen too high does inhibit dopamine in the hypothalamic area, and you don't want that because that whole area is necessary for you to have the mental side of libido, and specifically for dopamine to be firing. If you had somebody with pretty high estrogen where their libido was starting to go away, if they ran some 9-MeBC, they'd probably get their libido back. Because the whole basis of the issue there, at least from my perspective, is that estrogen is inhibiting dopamine because it does that in the arcuate nucleus. That said, for these individuals that are having problems with higher doses of testosterone, and if they try to take anything that lowers estrogen, they get side effects. The best bet really is going to be to find the dose of testosterone that works for sexual function, strictly for that. Hopefully it gives you energy as well, and you don't feel like you're tired and aren't anabolic. But at the same time, if you are running into those things, layering on a non-aromatizable androgen like Primobolan, like potentially Masteron, but again, those are AIs too, so that might be tricky for some people. I think one of the most ideal ones would be like very low dose Anavar, and I'm talking about 5 milligrams a day. 5 milligrams a day, so you don't skew your lipids or raise liver enzymes or contribute to any degree of stress on your body. I think most people are going to be able to tolerate 5 milligrams a day of Anavar, and interestingly, that dose of Anavar is still going to give you good anabolism, and it's going to make you retain mass and be able to put on mass and feel stronger in the gym, even at 5 milligrams. If you have real pharmaceutical grade Anavar, it's going to be very, very powerful, very, very powerful, even at low doses. People are going to find that, and if you don't believe me, you should experiment with that if you want to, with the proper guidance from a medical professional. Again, the Anavar that I have is actually prescribed, and that just ends up dialing people in. 100 milligrams a test a week, 120 milligrams a test a week, 140 milligrams a test a week. For some real estrogen sensitive individuals, or some people that get adequate tests from 80 milligrams a week a test. And then, call it 5 to 10 milligrams of Anavar. However you bring in a non-aromatizable androgen, think about if you're bringing in Primobolan in that case, it will inhibit aromatase further, right? One of its intermediaries in terms of metabolites does do that. So, you have to factor that into the equation, and hopefully that doesn't make you feel side effects from AI like effects happening. But it is, I'm going to be doing a podcast with Ryan Root from Hormones for Me, somewhere on the 16th or the 10th or somewhere in May in the evening. And when we do that podcast, we will talk about this. So look forward to that. It'll be on Ryan's channel on the Hormones for Me YouTube channel. Good morning, brother. That's all I wanted to talk about. Hope you guys are great. Hope you had a great weekend. I had a good week in that it is spring more so. I had a weird week in that we had a huge storm that blew over Pittsburgh and blew out the power for for anywhere from 2 to 4 days, depending on the location. And some people are still without power. So it was a really, really weird week. Okay. Zachary, what are your thoughts on metformin for gut health and keeping A1C down? Well, I think for keeping A1C down, it allegedly, it is pretty good at doing that. I am not entirely privy to or tapped in to the gut health aspects of metformin. So I couldn't really advise you on that, or at least, give my opinion on it. But I'm sure it does something. I mean, that shit seems to be very powerful and very useful for individuals to be taking. I think in the context of TRT, it does seem to regulate aromatase a little more. Metformin itself seems to regulate aromatase, which might be useful for people to experiment with. In the wide array of stuff that we have to experiment with, maybe metformin for managing estrogen to an extent, or at least controlling over aromatization, would be useful. Bethany, 40 milligrams test prop every other day. Been pairing it with Masteron and enthate, 40 milligrams every other day. Okay. To bring down slightly symptoms. Working well, just seeing that I can get Masteron propionate. Worth switching to this to the same ester. My suggestion at this point would be to, if I were you, I would take a situation that is working and not fuck with it. Yeah. That's what I would do if I were you. I would take a situation that is working and not try to change it. We have the tendency as experimenters and biohackers to want to change what we know already works, because we're like, okay, I mastered this. I mastered this. On to the next thing to master. Because we like going through, and I guess I'm suspect of this too, we like going through experimentation because it teaches us a lot. It teaches us a lot about our bodies, about, some of the compounds that we're dealing with and how our individual responses are. But if I were you, I would keep this the same. That's what I think I would do if I were you. Hope that makes sense. Brother. Ryan, does Proviron actually lower serum estradiol, or does it mask estrogen symptoms? That's a good question. Would 25 milligrams take my E2 or tank it if it were to the top of the reference range? Where would it take it? I think that blood work's the only way to really prove this, but Masteron does prevent to a, I don't know. I mean, and as an estimated 10 to 15% capacity, probably, let's call it 5 to 15% just to be safe, just to be scientifically reasonable here. Some degree of conversion of test or other aromatizable androgens into estrogen, into estradiol specifically. So how that translates to blood work in real time is unknown person to person. And it's likely, if I were to just guess, going to take estrogen down 5 points or so. 5 points. So kind of negligible, but maybe 5 points is enough. At 25 milligrams at once, what you're probably going to do for the next 6 to 12 hours is aromatize less, which could take the estrogen down, if it was prior to that at 45, to 37, at the very most 35, but I don't think you're going to be getting significant AI benefits from that at all. Yeah. It's just not as powerful as Masteron or Primobolan. Will Farrell, yo, just want to say thank you for the source list. Going to get that 20% DHT gel. How many MLS is a good starting dose to ramp up your energy, mood, and libido, and what dosing schedule? Well, I think if you're going to use a DHT gel, I'd first suggest that and by the way, I'm going to be saying this a lot more because, I need to make it clear that this is an educational YouTube channel. You should probably consult with a medical professional regarding this. But regarding, the dose, I would just offer you what I would do in this situation. I would say, first of all, you have to have an objective. Okay. If you want more DHT in your body and you're going to approach that via using exogenous DHT, then the way that I would think about this is have an objective, identify why libido is not where you need it to be, and then confirm or prove that you need more DHT to, block some of estrogen's genetic expression in order to resolve libido problems. You need to prove that, right? Or you need to at least suspect that that's the case, and then, bring in DHT experimentally on your own at your own risk to determine that. 0.25 milliliters is every other day would be a good starting dose in my professional opinion for this sort of thing. And then you'll have to titrate accordingly. Keep in mind that in these situations, DHT is pretty powerful at blocking the effects of estrogen, especially exogenous DHT. Your own innate DHT isn't as powerful as doing that because I don't think you can reach concentrations high enough of DHT with, converting a testosterone injection into DHT to where it's going to block estrogen at the gene level a whole lot. I think changing modalities of testosterone administration, like moving to testosterone cream, like a high concentration transscrotal cream, is going to offer more of the DHT, which will block some estrogen's gene expression. So that's just something to think about. The reason that you would need, or that one would use in this case, some exogenous DHT gel is because when you administer it transdermally, and it's high potency DHT gel, it is giving you a lot more DHT than injections would ever give you. Yeah, you're never gonna get as much DHT as you would get with DHT gel high potency versus injections. It's just not possible. So keep in mind that is going to block some estrogen effects, and that you'll need to titrate the dose accordingly. But, in my professional opinion and experience, what I would offer as an observation is that I've seen 0.25 milliliters every other day be a good starting dose. Jammer, thank you for the super chat, brother. Really appreciate that. If I'm dialed in on TRT and using Primo to control E2, can I still get benefits from DHT gel? Well, I think you can, but the one thing to keep in mind definitely is that what will happen here in this case is you will have additional kind of estrogen muting-like effects. DHT gel, again, if I dose it pretty high, and that's 0.5 milliliters every day, then after about 5 days, assuming I'm not like on a giant TRT or a sports TRT or cycle dose of testosterone, if I'm just on 150 milligrams a week or something, after about 4 or 5 days, I'll eventually feel like I have low E symptoms. But it takes 4 or 5 days to get there. And in those 4 or 5 days, my erections are nonstop. My libido is fucking crazy. So that obviously means that 0.5 every day is too much. That ultimately, 0.25 every other day, just as an example, might be the sweet spot for me in that case, or 0.25 every third day or something. But do keep in mind, you will get benefits, meaning, your physique will be a little more shredded. You'll have a lot more of that sort of masculine, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know I don't think I'm going to be able to figure out the word, but just a general traits that align with masculinity, like wanting to control your life and wanting to control your schedule and wanting to, be definitive with everything that involves details in your life and logistics. That's a very masculine trait. So you're going to notice some of those things, right? As long as this isn't taking E2 or E2's gene expression too subpar, too low, you'll have great libido and great erections, with it. So you just have to find that balance. You need to understand how to strike that balance would be my advice to have you consider, where you're not crushing E2 too much or the effects of estradiol. Thanks for the super chat, brother. Really appreciate that. Jay Gosh, thoughts on Masteron versus Primo as an add-on to 140 milligrams a week of prop for estrogen control and sexual function? What would I choose? The experience that I have personally with this, I'll just kind of weigh in on that, is that both of them at 140 milligrams a week, or a comparable dose, take my estrogen, I don't want to say in the serum too low, but I get too much of an AI-like effect where it starts to make my libido less good, and therefore erections get a little piss poor if I've taken too much AI, or if I've taken too much Primobolan, or I've taken too much Masteron. You have to understand that these two compounds specifically, if you go and study the scientific literature, Primo converts into, I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm just not even going to try to attempt to say the intermediary, but it does metabolize into a compound which inhibits aromatase enzymes. Okay, so it will metabolize into something that is an actual AI. Masteron does that itself, doesn't metabolize into something, but just acts as an aromatase inhibitor. But at the same time, it blocks one of the estrogen receptors. This is why initially it was studied for breast cancer for women. So in that regard, you need to know that these are, although not quite as powerful as Arimidex, as an example, they are pretty close. And on a mere 140 milligrams a week of prop, which already as it is peaks and then troughs and leaves thus less continuous estrogen conversion. Even though you might get a big peak, it'll just stop peaking at that point, which is good. These things are going to aggravate, the potential position of having too little estrogen. So you got to be real careful with this. Now, my perspective on this from an educational perspective and from what I've observed is that Primobolan and Masteron at pretty low doses, like 50 milligrams a week or so, 100 milligrams a week, are much better and are going to be a lot better tolerated on above 200 milligrams a week of test. That's just my observation so far. This assumes, though, that not everyone over-aromatizes. And some people do, for reasons related to poor thyroid function and poor blood sugar and, a lot of body fat, among other things. So, and those people, they're going to need, they can take some Masteron and Primo at 50 to 100 milligrams with a 140 milligram dose, not with a 300 milligram dose of test, and they'll be fine. You need to find out which one you are. CN asks, best time to take DHEA, AM and PM split, dose all in the AM. I've tried both. I've had clients try both. And what it seems to be, if I can, try to make this as less vague as possible, is that it seems to be different between people. That the morning DHEA dose of like 30 milligrams or so can last the entirety of the day for people and get like them some pretty positive effects that will admittedly start to taper off at like 6, 7 p.m. but still be somewhat present. You have to figure out if you're okay with that. But at 20-20 split, like 20 milligrams of DHEA in the morning and then 20 milligrams of DHEA in the evening, that, from my observations, seems to keep the effects from DHEA pretty constant without over aromatizing and over reducing to DHT, because that can happen from DHEA as well. I think DHEA is such a useful compound to have in anyone's regimen, particularly because DHEA makes it possible to synthesize androgens at tissues, much more than injectable testosterone does. DHEA you could consider like a helper to, both converting into like 7 or 8 different neurosteroids and being a neurosteroid itself, DHEA, via GABA A modulation, but also in helping convert tested DHT in tissues. Yeah, is what I would assert at this point. OG Aesthetics. Any theory on the PFS cases that don't tolerate TRT? How to fix these guys? Before PFS exogenous test makes me feel good. After PFS exogenous test makes me feel anxious and wired and feel like shit. I think the reason that this probably happens is because your body is still trained via some sort of downed state in the 5-alpha reductase iso enzymes to convert more of your test to estrogen and less of your test to DHT. If this wasn't the case and you converted enough of your test or an appropriately proportionate amount of test to DHT, the DHT itself would balance out, we would hope, in a perfect world, the effects from test converting to estrogen. In a perfect world, people's 5-alpha reductase enzymes work really well, and the test that they use, whether it's injections or cream or whatever, gets adequately and proportionally converted to dihydrotestosterone, which, balances a good degree of what might be an overage in the serum in terms of estrogen. Yeah. Or just people's reactions to estrogen. What you're experiencing here is almost definitely maybe two things, maybe some conversion of DHT, into other chemicals or modification of neurotransmitters that are somewhat stimulating that you're not used to because you haven't been reducing your test to DHT at high levels because you may theoretically have a downed state of 5-alpha reductase enzymes. So that's one thing you could be feeling. And then the other thing that you're almost definitely feeling is an inclination for your body to produce more estrogen compared to DHT. You're still probably producing some DHT. I don't think it's possible unless you actually silence the 5-alpha reductase enzymes to produce no DHT from testosterone. So you're producing some, but you're probably not producing enough. This is the thing that I think is happening in people that have PFS. And what's driving my professional opinion on this is looking at someone on 150 milligrams of test a week, split up into everyday injections, which would mean they wouldn't aromatize much, or a ton. They'd probably be at 45 or something, but their estrogen being at fucking 85. That's what drives my position on this. And I have looked at that blood work. 150 milligrams a week, doing daily injections, shallow intramuscular, and estrogen's 85. In no case, unless you're overweight, you drink a lot of booze, particularly beer, and you have a shitty thyroid, hormone output with pretty crappy, A1C and blood sugar, in no case should someone on 150 milligrams a week aromatize to 85 picograms per milliliter of estradiol. In no case. The only case in which this happens is people that's body prefers, due to a down state of 5-alpha reductase enzymes, converting, hold on one second. I think my mic just took a shit. Converting test to estrogen disproportionately compared to DHT. Hold on one sec, guys. One sec. All right, I think we're back. My mic software just took a dump. An actual dump, brothers. Hope that makes sense, dude. Bradley Hip Hop with the $20 super chat. Thanks, bro. That really makes a difference, man. I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to do that, and that you think it's important enough for us to dive a little deeper onto your question and do it via super chat. It means a lot, bro. It means a lot. Okay, so Bradley's getting night sweats with low SHBG 7. Estrogen is below 15 on test prop and cream. You have micronized estradiol, DHT 20%, HEG. Curious on how I can use these, specifically the E2 powder, to get my numbers back in range. I think you probably have low SHBG in this case. I don't know your doses of test. You would probably want to include that, so I can't really comment on that. DHT itself does bind to the sex hormone binding globulin, but like Masteron or Proviron does at like a 5x higher rate, or 5x higher affinity to that protein, to the sex hormone binding globulin. So DHT really shouldn't be lowering your SHBG all that much. Proviron would, though, especially if you're taking it consistently. Your dose on test prop does matter here. So I do not know why your estrogen is less than 15. If I was on DHT 20%, test prop, and test cream, my estrogen would not be 15 or below 15. It would be, depending on the dose, but it would be certainly higher than that. So, especially considering you're on HEG. So, I would if I were you, want to investigate exactly why that is happening. And really, the only thing that you can, change is, maybe the fact that you've got DHT gel as well as test cream, which both are pretty DHT heavy, it's just making it so that there's entirely too much, DHT substrate, which, by the way, for some individuals is not good for sexual function. If estrogen is crushed, below 15. For me, that wouldn't be a problem in terms of sexual function. If my estrogen is like kind of naturally below 15, I'm horny all the time. But with an AI and it's below 15, it's actually different, because inhibiting aromatase in the brain tends to mute libido. So it's just not a straightforward reduction of estrogen in the serum, and that's all that matters here. When it comes to tissue-specific regions of your body that have to have aromatization present, when you inhibit that, there's some degree of negative change in terms of libido for some individuals. Regarding E2 powder, I can't really advise you on that because I've never used that before. You would, I know it sounds cheesy to say, but maybe that would be something to consult a medical professional regarding. If I were to give like an opinion on that, like just an educational perspective on it, I would probably think the ideal scenario would be to, if the rest of this protocol makes you feel really good, to just, inject a very little bit of estradiol valerate every other day. And I couldn't actually give you a dose, but you'd want to start at the absolute lowest dose possible. The lowest dose a syringe can hold is what I would suggest. That's what I'd suggest. Zachary, what kind of useful supplements or lifestyle tips do you have to lower chronic high cortisol? Quite honestly, it would be running. We'll probably end up doing that via some sort of balance of neurotransmitters. Taking phosphatidylserine is the only supplements that, one of the only supplements that I know of that it looks like conclusively lowers cortisol. Phosphatidylserine would be, the most definitive answer. Simon Stone, I have noticed that aromatase seems to have a ceiling in terms of how much it can lower estrogen. 1.25 milligrams daily gets me from 113 down to 55, but I can't get lower than that with more aromatase. Without more aromatase. Well, you should be able to definitely take more aromatase at that case and get it lower than 55. 1.25 daily is not a lot. That's 8 or 9 milligrams or something a week. And I've got people that take 12.5 milligrams every 7 days, every 6 days as an example. So, and that keeps them at like 45. The good thing about aromatase is that it's less likely with the right dose to like tank estrogen. And the way that it does reduction in estrogen is slower than Arimidex, which is good. As long as you're patient with the process and you after 3 days, you don't really notice much of a difference. And then you just throw more aromatase down. Well, then you're going to end up in a pickle potentially because the stuff just takes a little bit to work. It's not that it takes a little bit to work. It works right away, but it takes a little bit for cumulative reduction in estradiol to happen via less, being available to convert to estrogen via a cumulatively increased effect over days of, inhibition of aromatase and of less estrogen accumulating. That's basically the answer to that question. In practical terms, what I would observe a person would need to consider in this case is to, bump that dose up to maybe 3 milligrams every other day. That's in practical terms what I would assert based on my knowledge that a person could do to reach a lower level of estrogen below 55 picograms per milliliter. That's what I would assert at this point. Trey, my girlfriend, 21 years old, is running low-dose VAR to lower SHBG after getting off birth control. Any add-ons she should throw in? Interesting. So she's running Anavar, a very low dose of Anavar, to lower sex hormone binding globulin because maybe it was high from birth control, probably because of all the estrogen in birth control, because obviously I'm assuming this is hormonal birth control, which contains estrogen. So that would raise SHBG, especially if she's not like on some sort of androgen otherwise. And, the Anavar will lower it. It will lower it. Yeah, it will lower it for sure. I can't really give you definitive advice on this. And this is something that I would suggest that she defer or you defer to a hormone doctor for, only because it's a woman, right? It's a woman. And based on what her goals are, they would have a better suggestion on what add-ons to throw in. I also could have a better suggestion, but I don't know what your goals are. I don't know what her goals are at this point. G. Hopkins, been using 20% DHT gel oil on gyno. Yeah, this is a good point. And this, according to the scientific literature, should work very well in reducing or eliminating gynecomastia, right? That's pretty clear in well-respected medical journals that this has the ability to do this at least. So that's something for people to keep in mind. There are studies that lay out pretty clearly that the use of transdermal DHT reduces gyno. So, good. You're on track with what the scientific literature says, and I think that's cool. I've had it for years, and it's reduced the gland size and surrounding fat by 25% in just a few weeks. Pretty awesome. 0.25 milliliters twice daily. Yeah, this is common. If you were to, let me just out of curiosity here, like DHT, transdermal, gynecomastia. Let me just kind of Google that real quick and find the paper. I think it's called Effective Prolonged Treatment with dihydrotestosterone by the percutaneous route. Yeah, breast enlargement regressed or was substantially reduced in 22 of the patients with hypogonadism. Okay, so quickly I'll show you at least that paper so you know that you guys can see that. This would be the paper here. Effective prolonged treatment with dihydrotestosterone by the percutaneous route. And there are other papers that specify this as well. But yes, this happens, and I guess I could say to that, interesting, and I'm glad it's working as intended. I'm glad it's behaving like the scientific literature suggests it behaves. Because that it isn't always the case that the literature is correct on what will happen because bodies are different. But in this case, it's happening, brother. I think this just shows how powerful DHT is at, blocking estrogen's effects. Because it's the gene expression ultimately that matters, whether receptors are activated or not. But they are in this case. When it comes to actual estrogenic effects, and in this case, the growth of the tissue, the breast tissue. So interesting, man. Dream big. How sustainable is 50 milligrams of Test-C every 3.5 days and 50 milligrams of Masteron every 3.5 days lifetime? From a practical perspective, I do not think that there, so long as you tolerate it and sexual function is good, is going to be deleterious, assuming that you are on top of maybe taking some tocotrienols, and some other things that would keep your lipids in a favorable range. Or maybe you wouldn't even need to take that, and lipids would just be in a favorable range at that point, quite possibly. So I think what you're getting at is this, in my opinion or observation, something that long-term wouldn't be harmful to your health? And the answer to that question is, as you run lipids so that you can determine the answer to that question. Because who knows how much it's going to lower HDL and raise LDL. People's bodies tend to be extremely different. I know guys that are on just TRT, like 150, 175 milligrams a week, pushing the high end, but still just within the TRT spectrum, that lipids are very fucking skewed just as a result of that. Now, is their lifestyle otherwise fucked too? Yeah, they probably eat too much meat daily. You know what I mean? They probably do not do enough cardio. And they might be drinking a lot of alcohol, which fucks your lipids, It raises LDL. It doesn't really fuck with HDL all that much. So who knows? But in the end, look at those bloods and then you'll have the answer to that question. Simon, do you have any clients on both an AI and a non-aromatizable androgen like Masteron at the same time to dial in? Yes, I do. And what it seems to be the case is that the Masteron in this case is not providing as much of an AI-like effect as the AI. This is never something, at least in my history, that I can think of that goes on continuously. Because, my whole goal is to suggest people get their lifestyle in order, get their body fat in order, get their thyroid hormones and blood sugar in order, and get their drinking habits in order so that they don't over-aromatize. Silver Shroud. Thanks for the 5 bones, brother. Appreciate it. Max, I have great success with... Hey, Max. I have great success with lowered test dose with low-dose S4 Androgen, 20 to 30 milligrams a day, having way less hair loss and lowered prostate weight. Interesting. So you're on 80 to 100 milligrams a week of test, and you're running Androgen, S4 Androgen. Let's see about that. So it is a SARM, right? Anti-cancer activity, stimulates apoptosis and HC cell lines, restricts their proliferation. Cool. Interesting. Yeah. mTOR pathway. Got it. So you have a SARM in the picture, and that ends up working well for you. I think that's great. I think that, potentially what we can glean from this is that in cases where people aren't tolerating high loads of testosterone, you almost always due to aromatization, that lower doses with controlled aromatization, meaning it's controlled because you have a lower dose, ends up working better, but still then you can get kind of androgenic effects at the gene expression level because you're modifying the androgen receptor, via an agonistic activity. So I think that's great. I think that's an interesting experience that you're having, and thanks for sharing it. Jay Gosh, would you take Masteron and DHT at the same time for sexual function? I'm trying to overcome PFS-like symptoms from Accutane. I would not. What I have observed that people do better on in these cases, not suggesting you do this, I'm just saying what I've observed, is that you don't want to tank estrogen, but you don't want it to go over the Quest Diagnostics range, which would be above 29 picograms per milliliter. That's kind of what I've seen. If it's above by 7 or something, that might be okay. But you don't want to be pushing 45, 50 picograms per milliliter because your body's already used to having had PFS. Too much of your testosterone converting to estrogen and not enough converting to DHT. The way to resolve not reducing enough of your test to DHT, according to the scientific literature, is to use exogenous DHT. Yeah. So what that would mean is that if you were to try to take that into some practical application based on the scientific literature, and you were making decisions based on the scientific literature, then I would think, or I would assert, that the best decision to make would be to remove Masteron and keep DHT so that you can theoretically upregulate 5-alpha reductase isoenzymes, which DHT, according to medical journals, can do. I don't think Masteron can do that. It's already, 5-alpha reduced. It does not act like DHT. It does not. It stays around a lot longer. It's a lot more protein synthesis inducing at the muscle tissue level than DHT is. And, those are some of the critical differences relevant to what you're, asking here. Nemo, if you just wanted a libido boost, can you run DHT cream by itself, or do you need HCG to keep it all intact as well? Well, if you're not running tests and you start running DHT, eventually you're going to start getting suppressed. Yeah, you will. DHT is suppressive, At the same time, DHT does help the production of seminal fluid and kind of maintenance, your ejaculate volume. So, that's useful, but I think there's going to be a point at which it's diminishing returns, or at least that you need to maintenance testicular function, Even on lower doses of test, I need a little bit of HCG, like 125 IU a day. Even if I was just running like 100 milligrams of test a week, doing daily injections, I would still need a little bit of HCG. Otherwise, erections get a little piss poor without it. I'm one of those guys that needs not to be completely shut down on TRT. Some people like Mike from Balance My Hormones. I did a long podcast with him, which didn't go live because a doctor that owns a clinic that also is part of a TRT channel disputed me disagreeing with him on air, which I think is childish and fucking ridiculous if you ask me, and had him take it down. That's what children do. Children behave like that. But, in that podcast, we discussed how Mike cannot take HCG and be fine. Seems to be the case that Dave Lee is like that as well. And seems to be the case that other people like that as well. I'm not like that. So you need to determine if you're like that. Can you run androgens without running HCG? Without running HCG. We'll see. Keep in mind that if you want to try to get a libido boost from just taking DHT by itself, if you're a natty, that it might leave you in a low estrogen state eventually, and that won't be good for libido. That won't be good. Silver Shroud, hey brother, have a Red Bull on me. Yes, thank you for that super chat, bro. These things, well, this is the 8 ounce, so I think these are like $2.50, $2.49. The 12 ounces are fucking $3, but whatever. Whatever. Thanks, though. I will enjoy a nice Red Bull on you, bro. I will, man. Or a Starbucks double shot with cream. I think they're like, yeah, they're somewhere around there. But I appreciate that, man. And I'm glad that you've been, watching the channel for this long. That really makes me feel good. And feel like what we're doing here is not some haphazard, dangerous thing. I've been accused recently of being what I'm not. All I am here to do is give good information based on what I'm seeing and help people make safe, good decisions with observations I've made over many, many years. Many, many years. In some cases, observations that a medical doctor won't make or couldn't make. And that's just reality. That's just reality. Big Nord, thank you for the $10, bro. I'll be able to buy a whole pack of Starbucks double shots with cream. The full cream, not the half cream. I don't want to half-ass it. The half cream. What is that? Light on the cream, please. Yeah. Light on the cream. Dummy. You were cool enough to email me back on a question about DHT gel. I got the Androgen and noticed the difference quickly. I rub it right on the thing. Libido erections, mood improved 20% on the way. Interesting. Yeah, so this might be the case that 2.5% is what I think the concentration of DHT gel is in Androgen. Might just be enough for you. And so be careful, if you are to bring in DHT at 20%. Because that is going to be a substantial difference than a 2.5% gel. And that mirrors my experience. Running 20% DHT gel versus Androgen is a night and day difference. Night and day difference. Yeah, it is really, really, really different. So, if I were you, if you have a situation here that isn't broke, try not to fix it. Try not to fix it is what I would suggest you do. I know you're going to be an experimenter and a biohacker like the rest of us, and try it. Try putting some 20% DHT gel on, and you're going to see, is it too much or is it good? Again, as I said, if I run 0.5 every day, after about 5 days, it gets too much. I just feel low estrogen symptoms, and then my libido is not good. But, for like the first, from like day 2 to 4 in that situation, my shit's like teenage boy status. Thank you for the super chat though, bro. Really appreciate it. Jesse James is among us. I'm on 100 milligrams of TestE a week and 300 IU of HCG 3 times a week. My SHBG is 17. Okay, so 100 TestE a week, 300 IU HCG 3 times a week. Okay, great. I think that is a pretty reasonable protocol. Total T is 770. I have low E symptoms with estrogen at 15. How I raise estrogen? Doc won't raise my testos. Yeah, this is one of the problems that often happens with people where, they're working with a medical professional and said medical professional will not help them to dial in, which is why coaches that may offer pieces of advice in those cases are useful and should not be devalued and looked at as if, we're trying to behave like medical professionals. We are not. We are finding a gap in the market and simply giving advice. So there's that. But regarding this, I think that there might come a point in your tenure using testosterone that you think to yourself that it might be useful for you to take your own advice in this situation. Take your own advice and to execute what you may know or you may at least suspect is good for your body. Know what I mean? And like in that case, if you were to do that, a couple options would be figuring out how to get the test to 130 milligrams a week. I think that'd be the first move, That'd be the first move. Somebody is suggesting a little more HCG. This is possible too, but I do think disproportionately HCG kind of makes the intratesticular ratio of test to DHT to estrogen like a little more in favor of estrogen. Maybe it strokes progesterone receptors. We don't really know. It definitely can be a little bit of a feminizing hormone the higher you take it. So you don't want to do that, at least in my opinion. So, just be careful. But HCG could be, a strategy there. 8 Ball says 10 milligrams of DHE sent my anxiety through the roof. 140 milligrams test cream and 125 milligrams Proviron per week dialed in with the DHE gave me some serious anxiety. I think that is probably because, probably because some of the intermediary, some of the compounds that it converts to, either androstenediol or another downstream neurosteroid that it will convert to, also converts to estrogen, and then also the androgen that it's converting to is converting to estrogen too. I wouldn't really suggest that DHEA is converting to DHT and that's causing you to have anxiety, although it does convert to DHT. DHT isn't acts like an antidepressant in my experience, an antidepressant like effect in people, and tends to make them happy and masculine and feel really great. I think that my guess would be that, considering you're dosing what is 17 milligrams a day of Proviron, 18 milligrams a day of Proviron looks like, that has something to do with this. Through whatever interplay. Yeah. Easy. With the $20 super chat. Thanks, brother. I'm buying all kinds of fucking stuff. Today I'm buying all kinds of Starbucks double shots with all these super chats, brothers. Okay. I won't sleep for weeks because of you guys, but I appreciate it because I don't want to sleep. I just want to get things done. Good morning, brother. Can you elaborate on using DIM and calcium glucarate for E2 control? Understanding Proviron. Proviron is again, as I said, it might lower the serum about 7 points. I really don't think it's going to be that substantial. CDG has a very temporary estrogen reduction. It doesn't last long. I once was at 92 picograms per milliliter of estradiol and took 1,500 milligrams of CDG at like 7 p.m. And then the very next morning at 7 a.m. ran serum estradiol again, and it was like 91. So it went down 1 point. But I didn't run it in the interim. I didn't run it 5 times from 7 p.m. until 7 in the morning. So there's almost definitely a point at which it had gone down at that point to maybe 85 or something, possibly 80. But I think considering a long-acting ester was in the system, it was still releasing from the depot and aromatizing. So it just comes right back. Can you guys hold on 1 second? Just give me about a minute. 1 sec. So, yes, like I think that these things are useful. I think that CDG tends to be a lot more useful when you have a lower, when estrogen is not like in the 90s, you know what I mean? In that case, when mine was 92 and I took a bunch of CDG, 1,500 milligrams at 7 p.m. and then ran estrogen the next morning at 7 a.m. and it was only a point lower, I was suffering from a lack of morning wood at the time because estrogen was too high. And, I think that night I had nocturnal and morning erections, which indicates that it's not necessarily just about the serum, which helps manage nocturnal erections. It's just about giving you a break from estrogen. I had a good solid break at that point, which was very useful. When ETI on the Brothers TRT clinic, hard to say. I've certainly had a little bit of a couple reasons to facilitate that further, which is what I'm going to do. So actually, the clinic that we're going to run, that I'm going to start is going to be, it's going to happen sooner than later. Yeah, it kind of has to, and I'm really excited about that. So I'll be focusing on that a lot. As I put my thoughts together and really get a timeline on it. Unfortunately, there's something else, in my life also that is taking some of my mind space on that, or just taking some of my mind space in a way which makes me kind of need to resolve it, sort of, or whatever, feel comfortable about it before I can give all of my attention on my free time to that. But we'll get there. Biscuit says, hey, Ryan, after months of pondering, you tipped the scale and I decided to run an experiment with DHT. Do you reckon 12.5 milligrams a day Proviron would be a good start on 115 milligrams of T? Pretty dial in. It depends on what your goals are. Yeah, again, I don't know what your goals are. So you got to specify what your goals are in these cases, man. DHT is not always useful to bring in any case. You have to have a real good reason to want to be running exogenous dihydrotestosterone. Or you've got to at least theorize that it's going to be extremely useful for you, useful enough to kind of tip the scales, in a positive direction at some point, which means just make sure you know what the fuck you're doing. And you've got a defined goal, brother. You do want that. Hope that makes sense. Jay Gosh, for people suffering with PFS through the use of Accutane, do you think some guys need super physiologic doses of DHT for sexual function? Have you seen the need for super high doses? I have. And the reason that I would theorize that this is the case is because you potentially have a state of suboptimal 5-alpha reductase type 2 isoenzyme function. And according to well-respected medical journals on this, it appears as if DHT itself can upregulate, the operation of 5-alpha reductase enzymes and thus conversion of TEST to DHT naturally, just endogenously. So, I think that super physiologic doses of DHT probably do people really good in these situations, so long as it isn't crushed into gene expression of estrogen, because they need upregulation of 5-alpha reductase enzymes. That's what I think. That's what I think is happening here. Wadwani, thanks for the super chat, bro. Really appreciate that, man. I'm not sure I've seen you on this channel before, but welcome. If you've been a lurker, thanks for fucking chatting with us, bro. Join the conversation, man. I love those guys that do that a lot. Love that. Hey, Ryan, even with 300 milligrams caffeine, a lot. These days, I'm drinking probably 500 milligrams a day of caffeine, just not all at once. Torque stack, still very strong drive to sleep at 10 a.m., daily naps to function. Okay, this is a hormone problem. Yep, T is okay with 30 milligrams of bought 4x cortisol test. Yeah, you want to look at cortisol, but you want to look at thyroid hormones for sure. Yep. There was a point at which I had pretty low-end thyroid hormones, in-range cortisol, but the low end of cortisol, and had 290 nanograms per deciliter total test, and fucking really, really terrible, fucking just dick-free test. Just nothing. And this is how I felt. Couldn't get out of bed. When I did, I would get up and try to run some coffee and whatever and some nootropics, and I'd feel good for a couple hours, and then I'd be like completely exhausted. So this is definitely this is almost definitely a hormone problem that you need to get to the bottom of. So I would suggest you talk with a medical professional and or use discounted labs, which would get reviewed by a medical professional, but it's a lot quicker. And run the gamut of labs to see where the fuck the problem lies here hormonally, because that's almost definitely what this is. Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you. I mean, that's what I'm here to do. Again, recently I've been accused of doing something that I'm not doing, on this channel. All I'm trying to do is give people good advice from what I have seen in real life. Which is perfectly okay and fucking protected under free speech. So, I'm going to continue doing it within the bounds that make sense. And, I'm happy that, I've been able to give you useful advice, or at least, provide from my perspective, useful observations for people to factor in whether or not they want to, make that advice actionable. Thank you for the super chat. That means a fucking lot, dude. Honestly, means a lot. It means a lot. It does mean a lot. Dream big. Is 50 milligrams of Test C 2 times a week and 50 milligrams of Masteron sustainable for a lifetime? All right, we have talked about that before, and I answered that question. Daniel, I was on daily sub-Q injections for 9 months, about 120 milligrams TRT per week. Okay. I felt miserable pretty much the entire time. Switched back to torches. Torches? About 3/4 weeks back. Way better. Thoughts on why? Troushes? Troushes? Or I don't know what torches means. If you're meaning injections, like, intramuscular injections, the reason why you would feel better in this case is because subcutaneous injections with testosterone release slower. They release slower. And some of it this is theoretical, may just kind of get lost in fat tissue and not end up metabolizing correctly. And I think that the test to DHT to estrogen ratio skews in favor of estrogen when you're doing sub-Q because there's a lot of aromatase in that tissue. That's what I think. There are plenty of anecdotals on Reddit, where you have people that switched to sub-Q and just like lost everything. They lost their libido. They started looking physically smaller. They start feeling shitty and anxious. And then they go, okay, I guess I got to go back to what worked, which was an intramuscular injection. And then they do it. And that day they feel better. That day. Well, sure. I mean, muscles are vascular tissue. Subcutaneous tissue is extravascular tissue, meaning not vascular tissue. So that's almost definitely what this is if you're referring to intramuscular injections in this case. Good morning. I would like to ask if cerebral lysin and IVC is a good combination. I have not taken them together, but I don't see that there would be some health like concern over taking them together. Might be a good idea to consult, a one of those medical doctors that also is into peptides and research chemicals and stuff, just to get a second opinion, just to get a second opinion. Don't exclusively take a YouTuber's advice that, deals with clients on a hormone capacity basis, et cetera. You might want to talk to a medical professional, like run it by him. Is there any blood vessel thing that you've got to be concerned about? Because cerebral lysin is pretty good at optimizing blood vessels. Is there any potential for some negative reaction via two things that are increasing the expression of neurotrophic factors, which both of these would? I don't think there'd be a problem whatsoever. And people have done this before. RT Wisdom, 1 year on TRT. The most frustrating aspects is that all PD5 drugs have seemed to be completely ineffective since TRT. Okay, the reason that this is probably happening is because estrogen is too high. It could also be the fact that estrogen is too low. When estrogen is too high and low, the effects from tadalafil specifically are different. It's not as effective. It's just not as effective. What this probably has to do with is estrogen's interplay with like penile nitric oxide. If it's too low, you might not have enough NO support for like endothelial function and therefore erection function. If it's too high, you might have overages of estradiol, which is causing some degree of, either some other mechanism or through nitric oxide mechanism, erection inhibition. Yeah. We know really, really clearly that estrogen that is, I think the range is going to be different for individuals, but estrogen that is like out of this person's Goldilocks zone is anti-erection. It's just not good for the male erection. The literature has like pretty conclusively proved that. So that's what I would suggest is happening here. I don't think there's some other mechanism by which this is happening. At the same time, if you don't have gonadotropins in the picture, then, Cialis might not work as well, or other PDE5 inhibitors, right? That would happen to me. That's why, like I said, I'm one of those guys that even on a low dose of Test needs a little bit of HCG. I just need testicular function and stuff to be like pretty normal, pretty comparable to a natty, with the addition of exogenous, hormones. In this case, a little bit of Test, enough Test. I'm running 100 milligrams a week of Test right now. Was running 11 milligrams of Anavar a day, but got some pretty bothering sides one day. I probably could have pushed through that, but I just reduced the dose to about 6 milligrams. And but I still need HCG on that. Silver Shroud, trying to help a friend come off booze. So I'm trying to figure out how to good strategy to implement. I don't know. AA would be very useful, but yeah, I mean, nootropics that affect the GABAergic system and the dopaminergic system would be useful in this case, I think. BPC 157 could be, BPC is pretty reparative, although I don't know if there's direct literature correlating it to being useful in the case of alcoholism and wanting to, kill alcoholism. I think that, alcoholism seems to be like, listen, I have a lot of experience with alcoholism, not myself. I've never been an alcoholic. There have been periods where I drank more than I should have, but I really, very quickly just got that under control because I know better. And my experience with alcoholism has been, my dad was the heaviest alcoholic I think to date that I've seen, besides my ex-girlfriend, who was a very heavy alcoholic. But my dad drank, starting from 9 in the morning on days off, 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, which is ridiculous and terribly unhealthy. Like big glasses of rum and Coke all day. And then on work days, he was a heavy equipment operator. He'd wake up at 5 a.m. and go to work and come home at 3 and then just start doing the same thing, start drinking. So it's either 9 a.m. start time or 4 p.m. start time of rum and Coke and beers mixed, And he never was able to solve this problem. And eventually at the age of 39, when I was 15, it killed him. He died of, multiple organ failure, as you would expect would happen. And it happens to everybody eventually that abuses alcohol. You're either going to have liver failure or you're going to have multiple organ failure. And before which you're going to destroy all your relationships. Definitely. That never doesn't happen. So I have a huge history with alcoholism. And so for me, coming off alcohol, if I find myself in a period where I'm drinking too much, is very easy, because it also disgusts me. It disgusts me how people get, falsely arrogant and, start fucking mouthing off, just popping off at the fucking mouth, saying shit they'd never fucking say sober. Like if you're around someone who's drinking, and they're being a little ballsy, next time they're sober for 2 days, which is probably going to be rare, but if you can find that, grab them by the shoulder, sit them aside, look them in their eyes and go, okay, bitch. You want to be like you were the other night? Let's see how fucking man you are or how woman you are now when you're yourself and you don't have this substance making you think you're the shit. It's fake. It's fake. It's fucking cringy. So it's this person needs to associate booze with pain, man. That's what they need to do. That's what they need to be able to do. It's AA and all this stuff seems to be effective for people so long as they can make it a ritual to consistently go to it. But, anything that you're doing that is like not helping you, there needs to be more pain associated with that thing than pleasure for you to stop doing it. So while compounds could be useful, the biggest driver of people changing bad habits is pain associated with those bad habits. That would be the best suggestion I can give you, man. Really. Will coaching become a part of the clinic packages or remain separate? Separate, because there's some legal, I would say there was probably legal barriers there. Like starting a clinic is just extremely different, for an entrepreneur without a medical degree. Where actual medical doctors obviously have to be a part of it, but medical doctors also have to be a part of the business ownership structure. So, in that regard, what I offer regarding coaching, would 100% be just a separate business. And if the legal aspect of coaching on, giving advice to people on what they could do to have a better experience regarding hormones, and then, having an ownership in an actual HRT clinic collide in some way which makes it legally questionable, then I wouldn't coach anymore. That's basically the bottom line. That's basically the bottom line, brother. Sorry, I skipped some questions here. MJ, hey, Ryan, 160 a sip and 45 a Primo every fifth day. Are you doing the sip every fifth day too? 315 milligrams a week of androgens, right. Low E sides now. Would HCG sort this? Probably not. Probably not. No. I think that your Primo dose, if I were you, I think the next thought to have would be possibly a reduction in the Primo dose would help. The almighty orangutan said, I did an experiment. I went off the AI because I brought myself to 18 of E2. That'll happen on AIs. I then let my E2 rise for 3 weeks, and it is 76 now. I feel pretty decent, but I'm wary of the high E2 sides rolling in. Thoughts? In the end, if 76 is okay for you, it's okay for you. You know, some people can tolerate pretty high estrogen. I would say, you know, as an estimation, that might be like 15% of people on TRT. Usually there's a problem with high estrogen. It's dick problems and being, being irrational tends to happen on those cases. Not necessarily even emotional, just irrational. So who knows? I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts about that other than keep experimenting and find the estrogen that works for you. Thoughts on Forskin for increasing androgen receptors. If it was effective, we'd all know it and we'd all be using it. Big Nord, I hear you on don't overdo it with the bump in DHT gels. I'll be careful. I won't use it now as I'm on Prop and Masteron. Currently just then 2.5% for now. We'll play with the 20 once I'm done with the Masteron. Yeah, just be careful. You know, understand that it's powerful at blocking estrogen at the gene level. And I don't know how good that will be for you. I don't know how good that will be for you. I hope we didn't just get cut off. If we did, I'm very sorry. I'm not sure what's going on with my internet connection. Okay, Nosy Blacklight. What is every path you would use to improve energy and drive? Energy and drive. It's too loaded of a question without a super chat. I mean, that to be perfectly honest with you, and I don't want to sound like a dick, but that'd be like a $50 super chat, or a consult. Bevnay, skip my question twice. Did I do something wrong? Nope. There's just a lot of questions here. There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to get to every one of them, if I can. Live Pack, love that name. Any thoughts on the estrogen resistance theory for PFS? Wrong. Those are my thoughts. That's wrong. Essentially downregulated ER expression when it needs to be upregulated through exogenous E2. Wrong. That's my thoughts. That's wrong. How could it be possible? How could it be possible that, listen, if you, in fact, the way that you'd prove this wrong is to take exogenous estradiol and note that you don't have, like the outcome would be that you don't have estrogenic side effects from it, which you will. You will. You'll eventually get, some sort of itchy nipples going on. You're going to be a little more emotional. Your mood might change for the better. Your mood might change for the better because estrogen's pretty good at doing that via, serotonin receptor sensitization. So if you take exogenous estradiol and that happens, you don't have a problem with receptors. Additionally, today there is no piece of medical literature that suggests that, citalopram, as an example, desensitizes estrogen receptor alpha or estrogen receptor beta. So, while I think it's good for that community to operate on theories so that they can take action to try to validate or invalidate those theories, I think that theory is wrong. Also because the primary problem, at least from my perspective in these cases, is a lack of sex hormones, specifically DHT, and of course, testosterone, and a possible, again, preferred pathway of converting too much test to estrogen. In other words, I have seen blood work of PSSD people that their estrogen is far too high for the dose of testosterone they're on. And they're not like fat or something, and don't drink booze at all. So there's something else going on there. In that case, estrogen itself would probably be counterproductive. Nope. If you listen, my position on this is if you're going to go as far as to take a female hormone to try to fix sexual dysfunction induced by an SSRI, you better be goddamn sure because that shit will wreck your penis. It's going to distribute adipocytes where smooth muscle will be and cause the destruction of smooth muscle cells. Good luck maintaining an erection without smooth muscle cells. Okay, so you better be goddamn sure that you have estrogen receptor alpha or estrogen receptor beta under expression before you fucking touch exogenous estrogen. I think that theory is wrong. Jared Saucedo, are the effects of Proviron simply caused by rapid increase in free hormones? That's a good question. I think that the increase in free hormones is a part of it. Yeah. I think the other part of it is like the hyper optimization of the 3 binding domains that sit on the androgen receptor that facilitate androgen-mediated gene transcription. And then to a lesser extent, like a minor extent, it's the inhibition of aromatase to a very minor extent. Any concerns with sources of suppliers running out of product with current tariffs? I couldn't really comment on that. I haven't noticed anything like to this extent at this point. Big Nord, you were starting making a big impact. You are now a disruptor in the TRT space. They are scared when they start TRT or when they start slandering. Yeah, I've gotten attacked this week. I won't talk about it in detail, but what I think that it is extremely immature. Extremely immature. I've done nothing wrong. I think it's extremely immature. I think that there's a way that adults behave, and then there's a way that I don't know. People that have strange ways of dealing with conflict behave. It's like the guy. It's like the guy in high school that like tells on you rather than sit you face to face and says, "Hey, I have a problem with what you're doing." It's really fucking weird. But thank you, man. Mike with the $20 super chat. I'm not sure why that's not coming up, but there it is. Cool. I appreciate that, brother. Fucking lifetime supply of Starbucks double shot creams with all these super chats, man. I really appreciate it, boys. Really means a lot, man. Would gene tests benefit our understanding of how we react to hormones? Therefore, we're getting a better chance to dial into our protocol. What are your thoughts on methylation and mitochondrial health? Yeah, this is just not my forte, man. So I think if you want to ask another question regarding TRT and stuff, I'll be able to help you there. Otherwise I can look into trying to refund the super chat here because I don't think I can really give you your money's worth here. Because I'm not a specialist in genes and genes relative to how we might react to hormones. Would it be useful to get like a full panel of gene expression so that you can understand, I guess the SRD51, I believe that's the gene or something similar to that. I'm probably fucking up the nomenclature that has to do with that builds the 5-alpha reductase enzymes. Yeah, that would be useful because that will tell you how you react to hormones, better. He means atrocious, not torches. Yeah, I thought so. Maybe that's just more bioavailable and that ends up helping you. So that makes sense. Josh, have a great rest of your day as well. I will too. I'm gonna really try to have a good day. I haven't had a good couple days, but I'm gonna try to have a good day if it's possible. If it's possible. Man, my estrogen was way too high. I had no idea. Had to control it once I got on PEDs. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, estrogen too high for a male is not the appropriate male hormonal status to be in, regardless of whether or not you have high androgens. I do not think it's correct to say because we have high androgens, we're going to have high estrogen and that's okay. Yes, we will have high estrogen because if we don't control it when we have high androgens, doesn't mean it's okay. It means it's what the body's doing. Not because it thinks it's a good idea, but because there's more substrate around to convert to estrogen. That's all. Garbage in, garbage out. You feed it what you feed it. It's going to do what it does anyway, up to a certain point. Zen Friend, what about tocotrienols makes them better than tocopherols? And how do they compare to the delta and gamma tocotrienols? I don't know the answer to that last part of the question. But it seems that the scientific literature points out very clearly that like there are positive effects both on hair loss, like preventing of hair loss, as well as they act somewhat similarly in terms of mechanisms of action to a statin. Whereas regular tocopherols don't do that as much. That's what the medical journal suggests at this point. So I hope that makes sense. If I were to want to take, which I do take tocotrienols every day. I just got a new batch of them, thankfully, in. Tocotrienols or vitamin E in general, for the purposes of trying to ensure that I have a healthy lipid profile and stuff, I would not be taking tocopherols because I'm trying to operate, from the literature as much as possible. I'd be taking tocotrienols. Yeah, I'd be taking tocotrienols. Big Nord says he appreciates the share on my dad more than I can imagine. The love of my life and mom to my kids is an alcoholic, and it's so sad. Even after moving out. So you moved out. You had to end the relationship. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, man. I know that drug, that substance destroys relationships. And if it's consumed in excess and it takes precedence over your partner, a person's partner, and where you're at right now in having, left the relationship, but you have kids with this woman, is a painful place to be. It's not in any way ideal to have such a commitment to a person in your life where you have kids and you spend a lot of time together and you had a relationship where this person has an addiction to alcohol. There's just no ideal. This is just not good. And you're gonna have to go through a lot of healing, man. The sooner the better. You're gonna have to go through a lot of healing. And it might even be the case due to all the lying and all the hiding that almost definitely took place and all the gaslighting and stuff that took place, that, your next partner needs to be pretty understanding that people don't just get over this. Being with someone that being with a partner that has like BPD or narcissistic personality disorder or alcoholism or a combination, hopefully you don't have the fucking trifecta, which I did in my last partner. It's real bad. It's real bad. And, your next partner needs to be pretty understanding that you'll have stuff related to that, whether you go to therapy or not. That people have the ability to fuck with your mind in a way that's lasting, and that, you can reset from, but it just might take some time. And also will take a very understanding partner. And that's not easy to find. And sometimes it's going to be a burden to you, or you will seem like a burden to need a future partner to be understanding of, your pain. But good luck, and I'm sorry that you're going through this. You will live. You will live. And in the end, you will be stronger. I wish you the best, with your gal and your kids and your future, because this all obviously interplays in a very strong, continuous way. So just have patience. Maybe go to Al-Anon. Talk to people that are like you, and that'll make the process a lot easier. All right. With that, boys, I'm going to end the stream. I got some stuff I got to attend to. Got to go see if I can do some exercise before it, rains and thunderstorms again here in Pittsburgh. So got to try to get that in. And I appreciate the questions today, boys. All the stuff that I'm associated with is down in the description of this video. You guys know that. Support the channel. Support us as a company the best you can right now, because it comes with awesome products too. If you need to hire me for coaching, links are down in the description of this video. Discount codes, I believe, should be down there for Torque, for our nootropics deck. So go get us, support us that way if you can. Otherwise, have a great weekend. More content coming probably Monday or Tuesday, so look forward to that. Shorts coming this week for both for this live stream and some content that we did earlier in the week, I think Wednesday or Thursday or so. If any of you are in the Pittsburgh area, I hope you have your power back. I got mine back, I think, Wednesday. So I'm happy about that. It was a weird. I think mine was only out for about a day and a half, but other people that I know's power was out for a lot longer than that. So it's been fucking weird. Have a nice day. Rock on, kick ass. All right, boys. Bye bye. Bye bye.